Good day all. This talk will examine the subjectivist analysis of superheroes. As I've said in my talks on subjectivism, this theoretical approach examines the subjective side of society with a twin focus, on the micro level and on the macro level. On the micro or individual level, it focuses on the creation of the self, or of a self-image. On the macro or social level, it focuses on the creation of meaning. I shall begin my talk on the micro level, looking at the creation of a superhero self-image, particularly by using the work of subjectivist sociologist Erving Goffman. Goffman argues that individuals play social roles in much the same manner in which actors play theatrical roles. As a person plays a role, she or he must create a self-image or persona which is presented to the general public and which is appropriate to that particular role. Superheroes create a public image which is based on them being two things, super and heroes. Having superpowers means that they can do things which the ordinary person cannot. And being heroes means that they're good guys, always there to help, always on the side of what is right. This self-image is therefore both practical and moral. Being a superhero creates both rights and obligations, like every other social role. As Goffman also says, every role has its props. Superheroes wear superhero costumes. Since these differ markedly from everyday clothing, they immediately signify that their wearer has adopted a role outside of normal social roles. The costume provides the superhero with a visual entitlement to step in during emergency circumstances and not wait for normal emergency services. While every superhero has a different costume, they all have a certain superhero look, which makes them instantly identifiable as playing the social role of do-gooders or assistant police officers, and so helps them gain social acceptance. Goffman also emphasizes that every role must have an onstage and a backstage. You play your role by going on stage. But in order to do so, you must also have a backstage, a private area where you can rest, recharge your batteries, and prepare to go back on stage. No one can be on stage all the time. We all need a backstage area for our physical and mental well-being. Ordinary people most commonly go on stage by going to work and go backstage by coming home. Superheroes take this to the next level by having secret identities, when they can temporarily stop being superheroes. Superman stops rescuing people when he's Clark Kent. Batman stops chasing criminals when he's Bruce Wayne. What appear to be their everyday on-stage personas as journalist and playboy respectively are actually just relaxations from the stresses of their superhero roles. They each supplement these roles with a more private backstage area. Superman's Fortress of Solitude and Batman's Batcave. Secret identities open up new literary possibilities because they allow writers to create two different personas for one character. Their everyday or mundane personality has to be different from their superhero personality, and for dramatic purposes, writers will normally try to establish a major contrast between the two. Upper-class superheroes such as the Scarlet Pimpernel, Zorro, Batman, and Iron Man all pretend to be silly, wimpy playboys in their everyday identities, in contrast with their role as determined men of action when they become superheroes. The famously mild-mannered Clark Kent does the same but without the money. As a plot device, this is justified with the argument that people in their world are less likely to think that a wimp is actually a superhero and so see through their secret identity. I argue throughout these talks that the earliest superhero archetypes were the strong man and the wise man. Another option that the secret identity opens up is to have one persona as the strong man and the other as the wise man. This idea was first put forward in 1886 by Robert Louis Stevenson in The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Usually, analysts focus on the moral aspect of the story. The good Dr. Jekyll drinks his potion and turns into the evil Mr. Hyde. But Dr. Jekyll is a brilliant scientist, and Mr. Hyde has super strength. So this is also a story of a wise man turning into a strong man, and a warning about the potential dangers of this. A number of 20th century superheroes have also made the same transformation. Bruce Banner is a scientist, a wise man, who is similarly transformed by a side effect of his work into a strong man, the Hulk. The Fantastic Four as a group becomes superheroes as a side effect of the scientific work of Reed Richards, the group's wise man, and the group includes The Thing, a new strong man. Tony Stark is a brilliant inventor who uses his inventions to turn himself into Iron Man. Peter Parker is a science whiz who becomes the super strong Spider-Man, not as a side effect of his own work, but of other scientists' work. Kurt Connors is a scientist friend of Parker's who accidentally turns himself into the supervillain the Lizard with a potion designed to regrow his arm. So, when a wise man becomes a strong man, his newfound strength can be used for good, or it can be used for evil. Goffman has also argued that whenever we take on a new social role, at first it feels like we're just faking it. But over time, with repetition, it becomes part of who we are. For Kal-El, Clark Kent is more than just a role. Clark Kent makes Superman human. It is as Clark that Superman has human relationships and becomes part of human society. Media analyst Gerard Jones has argued that in the early 20th century, having a secret identity made superheroes more appealing to recent US immigrants, because, in a sense, they had a secret identity. In public, they were Americans. But deep down in private, they still thought of themselves as someone from the old country, as a Pole or an Italian or a Jew or whatever. Like Kal-El from Krypton, they felt like they were just pretending to be Clark Kents. On the other hand, like Kal-El, They knew that their old world was gone and that they had to make a commitment to this new world they found themselves in. Immigrants, whether from Krypton or Earth, have to establish meaningful relationships with local people, as Kal-El did with the Kents, in order to become a part of local society. As Emile Durkheim has argued, when people lack such relationships and become socially isolated, they become a danger to themselves and others. They start to think, nobody cares about me, so why should I care about anybody? Morality regulates social interaction. If you don't have any meaningful social interaction, then morality becomes meaningless to you, and you ignore it. You lose your feelings of common humanity with others, and you stop caring if you hurt other people. In superhero terms, being Clark Kent is what has made Superman a superhero, not a supervillain. This is why, although in the comics he has recently made his secret identity public, Superman continues to work as journalist Clark Kent. Being Clark Kent allows him to maintain daily contact and ongoing relationships with Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, Perry White, and the rest of the supporting cast at the Daily Planet. However, newspapers, in both fiction and reality, have been changed by the coming of the internet. DC has said that they decided to drop the secret identity partly because it has become associated with internet trolls and stalkers who hide their identities. In the real world of today, it is, unfortunately, for the most part, bad people who have secret identities. Moving on now to the macro level, subjectivism asks, what do superheroes mean to society? What kinds of meanings do superheroes introduce into our culture which cannot be introduced in any other way? I would argue that superheroes allow us to think things and potentially do things which have never been thought or done before. They free our imagination. They allow us to subjectively break the bonds of objective reality. They take our minds to a place of transcendence. A number of media analysts have said this in different ways. Ben Saunders says superheroes are part of our, quote, refusal of the given as given. Neil Curtis says superheroes are, quote, the embodiment of the collective aspiration to transcend the given. Peter Coogan says that, quote, the idea of transcending the physical limits of human life is an idea of freedom inherent in the superhero. Christopher Knowles says that superheroes, quote, keep us aware of possibilities beyond the reach of our present understanding and take us to, quote, a space where greater potentials and possibilities exist. Superheroes transcend everyday reality. They transcend human limitations. They transcend what is and take us to what could be. They embody our hopes, our wishes, our dreams, our fantasies. They're part of humanity's refusal to accept that this is all there is, that this is the best that we could do. They show us that we can be more. We can be better. They show us the best that we can be. They are examples that can inspire us to do the seemingly impossible. You will believe a man can fly. He'll need an airplane, but he can fly. Superheroes have been accused of being just power fantasies, fantasies for weak people who want to feel strong. Well, they are. But to become strong, you first have to imagine being strong. Superheroes can empower the disempowered. They show that things do not have to be the way they are. They show that the weak can become strong. They show that what is impossible today may not be impossible tomorrow. Superheroes differ from other fictional characters in that they are created in a much more social fashion. This applies to both ancient and modern superheroes, despite the differences between them. Ancient superheroes were created by oral history. Modern superheroes were created by the entertainment industry. This means that ancient superheroes are legends, but modern superheroes are fiction. Ancient superheroes were meant to be at least half believed in. Modern superheroes are not. They're just meant to be purchased. But, despite these differences, there's a similarity between the ways in which ancient and modern superheroes have been created. Ancient superheroes usually began with stories of a real person or as a composite of several similar real people. And then those stories would change and grow as they were told and retold by generation after generation of storytellers. Modern superheroes have been created by one person, or most often by two people, writer and artist, working together. But as the original creators have left the company or retired or died, the next generation of writers and artists have reimagined or rebooted these superheroes, going back to the beginning, making some small but significant changes, and then taking the characters in a new direction. Now, most fictional characters are not like this. Usually, once someone creates a fictional character, then they are who they are. They don't suddenly become a different person any more than real people do. But superheroes are reinvented by each new generation, whether in ancient oral histories or modern comics and movies. The challenge faced by storytellers, whether in ancient or modern times, is how to tell the same story over and over and yet keep it fresh and interesting and entertaining so that you don't lose your audience. The answer is to provide alternative versions of the same story. So, over time, there is not just one superhero. There are multiple versions of that superhero in popular culture. One of the reasons for this is the longevity of superheroes. Most fictional characters die with their creators, but superheroes can remain alive in popular culture for thousands of years. This is because most fictional characters are individual creations, but superheroes are, and always have been, social creations. In the modern world, the process of reinventing superheroes is speeded up by the profit motive. The creators of modern superheroes generally want to make as much money out of them as they can. One way to do this is to provide several alternative versions of their superhero, designed to appeal to slightly different audiences. In comics, this has been done in three main ways. By introducing teenage and female spin-offs, by introducing alternate universes, and through reboots. Firstly, most superheroes are adult males, so there have been two main types of spin-off. Either introduce a teenage version of the superhero or a female version. Batman began in 1939, and already in 1940 he got his sidekick Robin, essentially a teenage version of himself. Since much of the comics audience consisted of teenagers, this proved popular. So in 1945, Jerry Siegel published Superboy, The Adventures of Superman as a Boy. Superboy was in practice not a boy, but Superman as a teenager. Since everyone already knew that Superman was raised in Smallville and came to Metropolis as an adult to work as a journalist, Siegel could put Superboy in Smallville and Superman in Metropolis, and so keep them distinct. The general public accepted this, and Superboy also became popular. Even so, it was not until 1959 that DC introduced a female version of Superman, Supergirl. And not until 1961 that DC introduced the female Batman, Batgirl. Since then, this has become a standard strategy. A character is first introduced as an adult male, and if he's successful, they then introduce a teenage version and/or a female version. In 1964, DC's teenagers were grouped as the Teen Titans, including Robin, Kid Flash, Aqualad, Aquagirl, Wonder Girl, and Speedy, who was the Green Arrow's teen sidekick, with more joining later. Marvel has not got into the teen versions so much, but it has got into female versions, introducing the Wasp as a female sidekick for Ant-Man, then having Ms. Marvel as the female Captain Marvel, and then introducing Spider-Woman and the She-Hulk. So, the first teen version was Robin in 1940, and the last major female version was She-Hulk, introduced in 1980. After that, all the main superheroes had teen and/or female versions, so that strategy had played itself out. Alongside these spin-offs, DC also introduced what were at first termed imaginary stories. Now, in reality, of course, all comic book stories are imaginary stories, so the term seems redundant. What it referred to was stories that were outside the superhero's main storyline. Writers for comics have the same problem as writers for TV series. Whatever happens, the main characters and their overall situation in life usually have to remain the same over the long term. This is very limiting. So, DC started to introduce one-off issues that took place in imaginary universes or alternate universes, where anything could happen. Superheroes could lose their superpowers or gain new superpowers. They could die. The whole world could be blown up. Anything could happen. And it didn't matter because next month the comic would go back to the familiar storyline. This allowed the writers to explore all kinds of new alternatives. Marvel eventually copied this idea. For example, in 2002, Marvel published the single issue The Megalomaniacal Spider-Man, seeing what would happen if Spidey had become a supervillain instead of a superhero. Writers of superhero stories have greater difficulty in not changing anything basic than other series writers because superheroes have the power to potentially change the world. On the downside, their battles could destroy whole cities and kill millions of people. On the plus side, they could potentially end world hunger, end all war, and turn the world into a utopia. For example, Superman does this in the graphic novel Red Sun. But while this storyline works for a one-off graphic novel, it would not work for a monthly comic series. This is because a large part of the attraction of superheroes is that they bring the fantastic into the everyday world. Most superhero stories are set in today's world. Marvel mostly uses New York. DC uses fictional places like Metropolis, but that just means big city, so it stands for the generic American city. This is why superhero fiction is semi-science fiction. Science fiction stories are usually set in alternative societies, on other planets or distant futures. Superhero stories may use super technology and have space aliens, like science fiction, but their social context is the regular world. This has allowed superheroes to integrate into the broader culture. If superheroes change their fictional world on a social scale, then their story will no longer be set in our world. They will have created an alternative society and taken the step to full science fiction. This is fine for a single issue, but as a long-term storyline, it would lose many readers who find it more difficult to identify with and care about a different society. As a lifelong reader of both superhero comics and science fiction, I know that superheroes have a broader appeal than straight science fiction. That's why I taught a course on the sociology of superheroes, but not on the sociology of science fiction. One-off imaginary or alternative stories give writers some more freedom, but they can only go so far. Eventually, the superhero's main storyline needs to be rebooted. If writers cannot change society, then they can change the superheroes. Comics introduced superhero reboots for several reasons. First, in cold hard cash terms, reboots are introduced to revive flagging sales. Publishers figure the public has grown tired of one storyline, so they introduce a new one. More specifically, the first and last issues of lengthy series sell way more copies than regular issues, and so make the corporation a lot of money and also strengthen the fan base. Second, in personnel terms, DC and Marvel regularly poach star writers and artists from each other, and when one of these takes over a comic, they generally want to start over in their own style. Third, in fictional terms, reboots can update the character and take them to the next generation without having children. Superheroes rarely have children, partly because they slow down the action, and partly because kids read comics to get away from parents, not to read about parents. So reboots replace children. Fourth and finally, in media terms, reboots mimic daytime TV. In the 1950s, soap operas discovered the technique of ongoing recycling of storylines. Every time you come to the end of a storyline, you just start again with a minor variation on that same storyline with the same characters. That way the show can potentially last forever. TV was introduced in the late 40s and comic sales fell through the 50s as audiences switched from reading comics to watching TV. One way that comics responded was by introducing more TV-style formats into comic books. DC stuck closer to the single-episode comic format of primetime TV, while Marvel used the ongoing format of daytime TV. This fit in with Marvel's greater emphasis on the emotions and relationships of its superheroes. Marvel comics have always been more of a soap opera than DC. All of the reboots done by DC and Marvel mean that although they're commonly referred to as the DC and Marvel universes, in practice, they're not universes, but multiverses. This term comes from theoretical physics. Some physicists have suggested that every time there are two possible outcomes to an event, the universe splits into two universes, with one thing happening in one of them and the other happening in the other universe. Since this has already happened countless times, there are by now an infinite number of parallel universes, each just slightly different from the next. These infinite parallel universes have been termed the multiverse. Personally, I think it is extremely unlikely that such a thing exists in reality, but it definitely exists in fiction. As I've said before, fiction reflects reality. The real world is like Earth 1 or Earth Prime in the multiverse, with fictional worlds splitting off from it every time a writer writes a story. Through their reboots, DC and Marvel have created not one history for their superheroes, but many alternative histories. For example, in one storyline, Superman marries Lois Lane. In another, he marries Wonder Woman. In another, he never marries. Superman could even be killed off temporarily because, for superheroes, death is not the end. Death is just a reboot. What DC and Marvel are doing is going beyond the everyday by exploring every alternative that they can think of, trying to present all the possibilities for their characters. Ultimately, superheroes transcend reality because they have superpowers. So to conclude this talk, I'm going to briefly look at superpowers. History shows us that for thousands of years, people have imagined superheroes with superpowers. Most of the superpowers that modern superheroes have were first held by ancient superheroes. First of all, as I've already argued, the strong man and the wise man are the original superhero archetypes. And so, super strength and super intelligence are by far the most common superpowers in both ancient and modern times. Beyond that, ancient superpowers also included communicating with animals, controlling the weather, flight, invisibility, invulnerability, living underwater, prophecy or precognition, reading minds or telepathy, shape-shifting, super-healing, super-hearing, supervision, super-speed, and finally, magic, which could potentially do just about anything. In particular, the gods and superheroes of ancient Greece exhibited all of these superpowers. European culture, and indeed Western culture as a whole, began with ancient Greece. To this day, Western culture is still building on things invented by the ancient Greeks, from theatre to democracy. Superheroes are no different. Wonder Woman is directly based on Greek myths. Thor is based on Norse legends, which are variations on Greek myths. Superman is the modern Hercules. Flash is the modern Hermes. Aquaman is the modern Poseidon. And most modern superheroes have superpowers which entered Western culture through Greek myths and legends. In short, most modern superheroes are updated versions of ancient superheroes, especially ancient Greek superheroes. Without ancient Greek mythology, most modern superheroes would probably never have been invented. Although I am sure that in one form or another, we would still, at the very least, have the strong man and the wise man. There are many types of superpowers and many ways of classifying them. I'm going to classify them into 4 main types of superpowers. Those that are expanded or supersized versions of human abilities, those that are supposed human abilities, those that are non-human abilities, and those that come from super technology. So, firstly, the earliest superheroes were created simply through exaggeration. Heroes are strong and smart, so superheroes are super strong and super smart, the strong man and the wise man. Other superpowers like super healing, super hearing, super vision, and super speed are similarly just super or exaggerated versions of normal human abilities. Invulnerability is just a super version of being tough and able to absorb punishment in a fight. And invisibility is a super version of camouflage, which is a basic hunting skill, becoming invisible to animals in the woods. Then there are those abilities that science says people do not have, but that a lot of people still believe in. The oldest such ability is magic. Magic has been around for a lot longer than science. Indeed, for most of human history, most people believed that magic worked and that there were people who could perform magic. In tribal societies, they were the shaman and the medicine woman. In agricultural societies, they became the wizard and the witch. While magic does have to operate according to certain rules, it has no built-in limits. Magic can potentially do absolutely anything. Or, to put that another way, magic can be used to explain absolutely anything. This makes it the most versatile of all superpowers. A magician like Dr. Strange can do literally anything you can think of. But the trade-off is a certain loss of credibility with the audience. In the scientific age, magic is yesterday's explanation. Most people today prefer scientific explanations, even if they are only pseudoscience, like Superman getting superpowers because he's from another planet, or a scientific experiment accidentally giving people superpowers like the Hulk and Spider-Man. Pseudoscience is not a real scientific explanation, but it's close enough for comics. In addition to magic, there are those supposed abilities which I call the modern magic, namely ESP, which stands for extrasensory perception, or, as I would term it, extra superpowers. These include telepathy, telekinesis, teleportation, and precognition or clairvoyance. They're all mental abilities, and again, science tells us that there is no such thing, but many people still believe in them. Originally, such abilities were considered magical abilities, but in the 1930s, parapsychologists began to try to scientifically study ESP. Although they didn't prove anything, the idea was popularized and gained a veneer of pseudoscientific credibility. So, for example, in the X-Men, Professor X has telepathy, Jean Grey has telekinesis, and Nightcrawler has teleportation. But these are not explained as magic, but as abilities brought out by biological mutation. Then there are those powers that human beings cannot do at all, such as Superman's heat vision, Daredevil's radar sense, the Human Torch's ability to control fire, Iceman's ability to create ice, Mr. Fantastic's elasticity, and so on. These powers do not have to base themselves on the human body, so there's a much wider variety of them. They include the ability to manipulate matter, energy, electricity, magnetism, the weather, people's perceptions, time, and probability. In short, to manipulate all of reality. They can range from the simple to the godlike. They represent humanity's hopes and dreams run riot without limitations. And finally, there are those powers based on super technology. Modern industrial technology has already in practice given us superpowers. A bulldozer gives one man the strength of 100. A car gives us super speed compared to walking or running. A computer gives us super memory. It allows us to access vast amounts of information instantly. The well-known Canadian sociologist Marshall McLuhan said that all technology begins as extensions of and improvements on the human body. For example, you can hold something with your hand, or you can grip it more firmly with a wrench. The wrench is an extension of your hand. You can hit something with your fist, or you can hit it harder with a hammer. The hammer is an extension of your fist. The media, said McLuhan, are extensions of our senses. For example, a TV camera and microphone allow us to see and hear things happening thousands of miles away. The electronic media have expanded our senses. In other words, they've given us super senses, super hearing and super sight, like Superman. However, as technology advances, it goes from improving on human abilities to giving us new abilities. For example, a bicycle is an obvious extension of your legs. As you pedal the bike, you're making basically the same movements as walking or running, but the bike allows you to go faster. When you add a motor and turn the bike into a motorbike or a car or a train, you don't have to move your legs anymore, but it's the same basic idea. It's a form of transport that has wheels so it can go fast. But when you add wings, it becomes an airplane. An airplane is an extension of a car. It is a motorized vehicle, one that goes even faster than cars and trains. But, of course, an airplane can do something that human beings cannot. It can fly. After thousands of years of dreaming about flying and inventing superheroes that could fly, people finally invented a machine that could fly. So, the power of flight started out as a non-human ability. The birds and the bees could do it, but people could not. But in the 20th century, thanks to technology, flight became a human ability. Today, anyone can fly to anywhere in the world, as long as they can afford an airline ticket. What was once a fantastic superpower is now an everyday reality. Super technology extends human abilities still further. Iron Man's armor protects him as an extension of his skin, but also allows him to fly and to fire energy blasts. Ant-Man's suit allows him to shrink to microscopic size or expand to giant size. Green Lantern's ring allows him to create anything he can imagine. So, technology can incorporate both extensions of human abilities and completely non-human abilities. Technology is like magic in that we don't know what its limits are. We don't know what gadget someone might not come up with decades or hundreds of years from now. Since current technology allows us to do things that were once impossible, it's a safe bet that future technology will allow us to do things that are currently impossible. Some even believe that technology has no limits and that it will one day give us godlike powers. I believe that technology does have its limits, but that we still have a long way to go before we reach them. Super technology allows us to imagine what future real technology might be like. For example, cell phones were directly inspired by the communicators on Star Trek. Without Star Trek, we might not have cell phones. And for today's generation, that's probably the scariest idea I've ever mentioned. Ultimately, all four types of superpowers are expressions of humanity's desire to be more and to do more. Whether it's through magic or technology, in ancient myths or modern fiction, we strive for more. Superpowers are part of humanity's refusal to accept our present limitations. If we want to do something that we cannot do, like fly and even fly to the moon, then we imagine ways to do it. And eventually, we imagine a way that works, like building airplanes and spaceships. And then we go right on imagining. We imagine superheroes who can do anything that the human imagination can conceive of. Superheroes offer the artist a type of creative freedom not found in any other genre. The freedom to imagine characters that are literally larger than life. The freedom to expand our cultural universe in new ways. The freedom to imagine things that have never been imagined before. The freedom to boldly go, at least in our minds, when no one has gone before. Because once you strive to transcend, to be more than you are, well, the sky's the limit. In the immortal words of Superman, up, up, and away. That concludes what I have to say on the subjectivist approach to superheroes. A transcript of this talk is attached if you're interested. Good day.